Priti Patel defeats the civil service, and we are joined by Isabel Oakeshott to talk about the establishment and the lockdown. Well, if you've been following this channel over the last couple of months, we've had the civil service machine and the establishment making a move against Priti Patel in the Home Office. Obviously, she's the Home Secretary and she's in charge of that department. And we've had a number of top civil servants deciding to plot against her. We had Sir Philip Rotnam, who resigned and launched a legal action and a proper investigation into Priti, because apparently Priti Patel is a mean boss and she intimidates you. So on that ground, you know, the inquiry started. Today we have, yesterday and today we've had the result of that investigation. So the review ordered by Boris Johnson is believed to have found no evidence to support these allegations that she was intimidating his staff while currently being at Home Office or previously at the Department for Work and Pensions and the International Trade. This report by Sir Mark Sedwill was completed within the last week and was given to Boris Johnson on his return to Downing Street on Monday. A Whitehall source says that they have looked at all the claims and found nothing. Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, the former Conservative leader, has also told the inquiry that there was no truth in the allegations, and he said that I was categoric in the inquiry that there was no allegation against her, nor was she investigated at the time. He urged the government to investigate why the Home Secretary had been subjected to such allegations. The findings are expected to be announced later this week, although it is not thought likely that the full report prepared for the Prime Minister will be made public. It comes only days after Sir Philip Rotnam, the former Home Office Permanent Secretary, formally launched his legal action against Priti Patel. So well done, guys. Your plot against the Home Secretary massively failed, and the People's Government is winning again, as the supporters of Boris Johnson would say. So this is the whole situation right now. The latest update we have is that Priti is now fully cleared. A lot of people are saying that this whole thing started because she was pushing for certain reports from the Home Office to be released publicly, and the top civil servants weren't too happy about this. And there were also a lot of other issues which we don't really know about, but there were a lot of clashes going on. That's why this whole thing started. Now, today we are joined by the political journalist and the commentator Isabel Oakeshott to talk about this issue and also the lockdown in general. Right, so I'm now joined by Isabel Oakeshott, one of the top political journalists and commentators in this country. Welcome to the show, Isabel. How are you?
Thank you. How's
lockdown treating you?
Well, we've all just got to get on with it, really, haven't we? I mean, you know, there's no point in being angry or frustrated. It is what it is, and I think everybody's sort of finding new routines. Yep. Although it's a lot easier when the sun is shining. Although perhaps not if you're in a tower block and you can't even get out.
No, you're right, absolutely. I live in a small flat in central London. It's not the best. Although I live next to Hyde Park, so I can actually go for a walk every now and then.
Well, I hope you're not looking over your shoulder too much at the prospect of the police asking you what you're doing.
I did, actually, the first couple of weeks of the lockdown, they were very strict. The police were going around Hyde Park area, and at one point I almost got arrested because I was walking for a long time. I sat down for like 2 seconds, and they literally said, as of today, we're arresting people. I was like, that wasn't the only issue. My issue was that they walk around together, the police officers, in big groups.
Not social distancing at all, those police officers.
No, but I don't understand why they have to walk in groups of 10, 15.
It's approach one person. Safety. That's what it is.
Yeah, exactly. But otherwise, everything's good. So today we've had the latest update from this whole Priti Patel saga and the battle between her and the civil service. And apparently the investigation says that she's cleared. Does anyone actually care at this point with everything's going around, or?
Yeah, the short answer to that is not really, apart from Priti Patel, who can now probably relax a bit. Funny thing about this story is that in normal times, in peacetime as it were, a cabinet minister in that level of trouble with her civil servants would be a big story. And some of the claims that were coming out about Priti Patel's behaviour were quite colourful and dramatic. And, you know, normally that would seem to, if not seal the fate of a cabinet minister, at least leave their career hanging in the balance. But the reality is that, events have been overtaken by far bigger things. And I think most people have forgotten Priti Patel's sort of small internal, what now seems like a rather small internal difficulty with her staff.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I mean, with everything's going around, I don't think that this is a priority. I mean, the media are talking about it today, even Sky and BBC. I was kind of surprised because I thought they're just gonna kind of ignore it slightly. But the whole thing. Do you think there are elements in the civil service that are difficult on purpose and biased?
Well, there's certainly elements in the civil service that are biased. I have some serious reservations about the way the civil service conducts itself. We saw that over Brexit. Institutionally, the civil service was basically pro-Remain, and I was involved in a number of stories about that at the time, the extent to which those on the Brexit side of the argument felt almost terrified that they would be sort of exposed within the civil service. Such was the sort of outlying nature of their view. And I think, Priti Patel is a pretty no-nonsense type of person. She doesn't suffer fools gladly. And she always had the support of Downing Street, namely because Dominic Cummings spent a long time in contact with the civil service when he worked for Michael Gove at the Department of Education, and was utterly scathing about what he saw as its flaws. And he used to write about that at great length in his blogs, and they actually make a great read. You wouldn't have thought that thousands of words of sort of bile about the civil service could be so entertaining, but he writes very well. And his hostility to the civil service is born of his experience in that department, trying to push through reforms and constantly coming up against what he characterized as this blob.
Yeah, it's quite interesting actually. And but this whole thing is becoming fascinating because now today the Labour Party has said that we need to scrutinize the report that was to scrutinize the whole situation. So I'm like, okay, let's just have an investigation into the investigation.
Yeah.
That's kind of funny. But putting that aside, now let's talk about this whole lockdown situation. What's your view overall with the way it's going? Was it the right decision, or is it the right decision to keep extending it, or should we just slowly ease it out? Or
so this is a point where it's great to be a journalist and not a politician, because you can just carp from the sidelines without actually having to take any of these incredibly difficult judgments. So, I mean, what I would say, in defense of the government is, can you imagine if they had sort of defied the advice of their chief scientific and medical officers and just kind of done a Sweden and decided we were just going to go for it and not introduce any restrictions and see how that played out? You can imagine it would be a kind of, Iraq war level inquiry that would follow that and would be terminal for many political careers. But at the same time, I am very uncomfortable now about the extent to which the government repeats this mantra about at all times following the scientific advice in the decisions that they are making and the tremendous restrictions that they are placing on everybody in this country. Because the reality is there isn't a uniform scientific position on any of this. We're in a very new territory here. We don't know nearly as much about this disease as we would like to. And scientists disagree about the best way to go about trying to hold the country together and keep the economy going in some way whilst minimizing the loss of life. So there isn't a uniform scientific position. And in the end, in fact, rather sooner than later, I would say, what needs to be taken are political judgment. It is a political judgment about the balance of risk. And, the consequences on the one hand of loosening up these restrictions that have been placed on us, which may well lead to a surge in the number of infections that are sadly ultimately fatal, but at the same time may hopefully limit the number of people suffering all sorts of consequences as a result of the restrictions, and they include health consequences. I think what's happening to cancer patients is truly appalling. You know, in many cases, these are people who they already have a cancer diagnosis. It may be that they are in, you know, final stages or terminal stages of cancer, but they have been promised the opportunity to take part in clinical trials that might extend their life, give them a precious another 9 months or a year, and those trials are off. Then you've got people who are waiting for organ transplants, those are off. Then you've got people who think they are worried they might have some kind of symptoms that could possibly be a sign of cancer, and yet they feel put off from going to hospital. I mean, in my area, if you go onto the website for the Oxford University NHS Trust, it says, please do not come to our hospitals. You know, this is so sort of hostile, I think. You know, the hospitals are not just there to treat corona patients, and there are real concerns also about mental health. You know, we could go on and on about the other consequences. So there needs to be a balance of risk. And at some point, I think you've got to open it up to people to say, actually, you have to consider what risk you personally are prepared to take. You know, by all means, if you're in a high risk group, stay in. That's probably wise. But if you are willing to take the risk, then, you know, seriously, at some point, we've got to go about our business.
I think you're right. Firstly, in terms of the NHS capacity, well, that was one of the objectives, and it seems like we have achieved it. There are hospitals and medical professionals that can provide the service now.
And yet I was contacted by an oncologist last night who said, you know, we at my trust, is in a London trust, we have to ask Public Health England, so central government, for permission to resume treating cancer patients. There's something very wrong about that, you know, where a hospital trust has to ask the government for permission to continue treating cancer patients. You know, who are we prioritising here and why? Because aren't all patients in some way created equal? If you've got cancer, you're surely as much of a priority as somebody who has got corona.
But it's not just the NHS trusts. It's, as you mentioned, it's, I think my view has always been in politics for the past few years, which is, I think we've gone through a phase, the last few decades, probably the last century or so, in the West at least, that because people have relied so much and they've become so dependent on the state, that not just in terms of financially or kind of in terms of safety net, but actually philosophically and mentally, that right now there is no such thing as personal responsibility or actually understanding where you are as an individual, whether you are, as you said, you know, if you can tell yourself that you're healthy and you're fine and you're being careful, you should be able to go back to work, to your office, you know, and everything. But people have been treated in the West as, you know, stupid, and, you know, you have to basically wait for the government and politicians tell you how to live your lives, and this is where we are now.
And I personally resent that. I think it's really sinister, but I have to accept that all the polls show that there is overwhelming public support for that. But at the end of the day, if you are you've been furloughed and you're receiving between 80 and 100% of your wages to be at home and stay safe, then I understand why you naturally prefer that scenario to what everyone has now presented as a, you know, horrific risk of stepping outside your door. And I think the government does bear some responsibility for over frightening people.
It's not, and you're right, it's not necessarily just the government. The media, it has an interesting role in this whole thing, because on the one hand, they need to be there to scrutinize and question everything and everyone, and that's obviously right. On the other hand, there are a lot of people who think that the way the media presented this whole situation has actually made it worse. This whole negativity, this whole kind of fear that they're being creating. What's your view on the journalists and the media?
So I think this is really, really interesting and really weird. And it sort of comes down to how real and representative is Twitter, because a lot of the hostility to journalists is expressed on Twitter, but Twitter is just a small portion of the population. And, you know, if you go on Twitter, you would believe that journalists are out of step with the public mood. And there is a lot of anger on social media. about journalists asking the government difficult questions.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think the biggest issue is, especially with the social media emerging over the last decade or so, and politics becoming entertaining again, and tribal. I think personalities kind of trump in terms of over what the content is, and I think this is why that a lot of people would say, for example, both Andrew Neil and Piers Morgan ask tough questions, but Andrew Neil doesn't get attacked because of the tone and because of the way he says it, he talks about it. Whereas Piers Morgan, because he comes across as whiny, people don't like it. Do you think it's also the way the journalists are saying what they're saying rather than what they're saying?
Very different. Andrew Neil, I've worked with both of them. Andrew Neil is a forensic inquisitor. I know of nobody better informed than Andrew. He is across every detail, reads all the foreign press, and truly remarkable. Piers is a rabble rouser. I've got great admiration for Piers. I think he does a brilliant job and his career has been phenomenal, but he is a rabble rouser. And I've said to him on Good Morning Britain that, I do think he's slightly lost the plot on this one. He has gone over the top, and I kind of assumed that all Piers' dramatics on this would have led to a big surge in Good Morning Britain viewing figures. But actually, if reports are to be believed, they've lost a lot of viewers since Piers has gone off on this. Now, there may be other reasons why, but it seems that this would link back to what we were talking about earlier about the kind of public unease about journalists being too aggressive with a government that voters do appreciate is, whatever mistakes they might be making, at least doing their level best, even if they're sometimes incompetent, and we all are sometimes, in remarkably difficult circumstances.
I think you're right in terms of how Piers Morgan is, because I think he's a performer, and he provokes, and he's controversial, and that's his style, and that actually has helped him in the past, especially with GMB. Rating
Definitely.
Until recently.
Well, he's also made that program really relevant. And we're not here to debate the merits of media shows, but it is fun to watch, and he is getting the clickbait material, and that is part of modern media, isn't it?
I think the only issue is that his strategy and the way he is, it's just a bit risky. For example, when he was controversial during the post-Brexit era, the whole Ramonas and everything, that worked. Yeah. Whereas it's kind of, you can't really, it's all the benefit of hindsight. He probably didn't know that if he goes kind of crazy now with this whole situation, that he's going to actually lose the audience. But it's probably happened. But anyway, we don't want to talk about Piers Morgan the whole show. He probably enjoys it if we keep talking about it.
He would do. That's exactly what he wants. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's working. So, but this whole lockdown. Do you think that there is? I mean, we're not really medical experts or scientific experts, but do you think it's now time to? Because that
never stops us getting stuck in, though, really, does it?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think it's time to, because the 5 tests that the government has, it seems...
I've got a real problem with the 5 tests. Sorry to butt in. These 5 tests really annoy me. I can buy into some of the tests, right? But there's one of those tests that I have a particular problem with, and it is the one which actually, if you read the precise wording, does not say there should be no risk of a second spike.
Oh yeah, the last point. Yeah, it's quite vague, isn't it?
That's how it's paraphrased by politicians. So actually, Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, yesterday in his press conference, used the words "no risk of a second spike." Well, hang on a minute here. There will never be no risk. Not even, I mean, there's probably not no risk of polio coming back. There won't be even minimal, infinitesimal risk until you've got a vaccine and you've by and large wipe the whole thing out. I mean, look at, for example, measles. Most people, not all sadly, but most people do allow their children to have the measles vaccine. But there are still waves of measles in certain areas now and again, in quite a worrying way. So if the criteria that's being set is that there should be no risk of a second spike, then guys, we better get used to this lockdown because we're here for a long old time.
Yeah, no. I mean, we'll have to kind of wait and see how it goes. And I guess, I have a feeling that because the five tests are quite. The last point is very vague. I'm fine with the NHS capacity target. That's fine. That's kind of easier to kind of at least.
Yeah, if that's obvious, it makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's happening already, and the new cases
Yeah,
still going
yeah,
down slowly.
yeah.
Maybe we are going to see some sort of easing.
Yeah, I
But
mean, I am worried about what is meant by, and I don't have the five tests in front of me, but the kind of the significant reduction. I don't know whether deaths are in there or it's only new
I
infections, but
think they're in there too. I can't remember now, but
yeah, I mean, we're still at a stage of between 5 and 7-ish hundred deaths being reported a day, and that's before we have the care home figures. So it feels to me that if that is one of the key criteria, and I do sort of understand the logic for that, we are still a very long way off being able to go anything like back to normal. And I think I think all of us, certainly speaking for myself, have been on something of a kind of psychological journey here, where at the beginning you're thinking, okay, this is really weird, but hopefully it's just for a couple of weeks. And then, everything's just going to go back and my old life's going to be like it was. And we can go out and we'll be able to go out for dinner and book a holiday and all of that. And very gradually it's becoming more and more depressingly apparent that, simple things that we all took for granted, like going out for dinner, that probably isn't going to happen again for a period of potentially months. And as for booking a holiday, nobody at this point is saying that that would be a safe thing to do, really, before the end of the year. Unless you can afford to potentially gamble away several £1,000s because your airline has gone bust and the villa company can't honour the booking or whatever else it is you booked. It seems like too much of a risk, really. So this is a whole new world that we're slowly trying to come to terms with, and I mean, it's pretty depressing, isn't it?
I know. I mean, it seems like we're going to be in limbo for a while. But what I want to say a massive thank you again for coming on the show. And what I'm hoping for is that all this to finish, and then we could actually do the next one in person. And when we're all actually free.
I thought you were going to say like we could do the next one in I don't know, in a pub or a club or something like that. Maybe that should be the great
yeah, we have to wait for a couple of years for that. But
I literally got an email from a restaurant today saying they're organising a comeback party and could you buy your ticket for it now? I'm like, probably not.
500 people are coming.
Yeah, like when? Next year?
Well, yeah.
Anyway,
what could go wrong? Yeah, absolutely. Any last few words?
My last few words are let's just hope and dream of better times, because I'm looking out at the steely grey skies and thinking there is literally zilch to look forward to at this point. So we've all got to keep our spirits up and hope things get better soon.
Well, thanks again, everyone, for watching today's show. And we have the daily vlog as well at 8 p.m. Maya's Life, where we're going to be talking about the BBC Panorama working with the Labour Party to attack Boris Johnson and the government. So make sure to watch that at 8 p.m. And apart from that, thanks again. I'll see you guys in the next video.